I am going to be speaking from my recent research monograph, which is shown up here, and as Rose said, it was published earlier this year. In this monograph, I take up the theme of care, and I would like to take this opportunity to ask what laboratory animals might reveal about the crisis of care, one that is generally understood as a distinctly human affair. There's general recognition, albeit one that waxes and wanes, that the UK is experiencing a crisis of care. Much of the current research on this crisis has been rooted in political economy and traces back to the work of Joan Tronto. The focus has been on critiquing the devaluation of care work in political and economic terms. I find this work incredibly helpful to think with, and I will not be arguing against it. However, I will show that to understand care work in the context of laboratory science, I found it more useful to understand care as knowledge. I draw on the alternative lineage of Carol Gilligan's ethic of care. I conclude by asking what care for laboratory animals as a case study teaches us about the crisis of care more generally. To do this, I will start with an ethnographic vignette from my research, and I don't have slides I'm going to be reading, but this is story time, so you can get comfortable. Okay. So today I am shadowing Martine, a young animal technician who has recently switched her focus to laboratory animals. Martine says that she enjoys this work and she enjoys science. She immediately tells me that she finds my work as a sociologist confusing, to study the social life of people as a scientist. Martine proudly presents herself as an animal person, and as someone who would much rather be in the presence of animals. She longs for a cat. Martine finds me, or rather a sociologist, a curiosity, one that she is nonetheless intrigued to learn a little bit more about during our day together. Martine explains that today is a slow day, as it is Friday. All she will do is check the cages that are the homes of the mice. The cages are checked twice per day, per Home Office regulations of laboratory animal welfare practices in the UK. But Martine explains that the Friday afternoon check is more rigorous. If she thinks any cage may be at all low on food or needs a change of bedding, Martine wants to address this now. Doing this work now is as much for the mice as it is for her colleagues. The animal technician who will be coming in over the weekend to check on the mice twice per day can do so rather quickly if the Friday afternoon check is thorough. Martine also doesn't want any risk of the mice not having their needs met over the weekend. Martine begins by ensuring the water filtration system works for the rack, which holds approximately 100 cages containing anywhere from 1 to 6 mice. Martine then pulls out one cage at a time to visually check the mice, ideally without opening the cage and disturbing it. If Martine needs to open the cage to give more food or to check on the mice more closely, she will flip the tag on the cage upward so that she can do this additional work after checking the entire rack. I comment that Martine clearly sees things that I cannot see, as she checks the mice without opening their cages. Martine agrees with my assessment, but struggles to put into words exactly how she goes about knowing that the mice are okay by looking into but not opening the cage. A few minutes later, she says, "Do you want me to show you a trick?" I eagerly say yes. Martine is holding a cage in which all the mice are huddled under a red tunnel, which I have been told allows them to feel like they are in the dark, while the animal technician can still see them in the cage. Martine can then count the mice and visually ensure the correct number of mice are present. Martine has the cage rested in one hand, with the other hand on the side of the cage, and is holding it at eye level so that she can look in. Martine tells me that she always puts her hand underneath the mice on the bottom of the plastic cage to ensure that she feels their body heat. Martine knows the mice are alive and well by feeling their warmth through the plastic cage. That way, Martine checks that they are physically okay by feeling the traces of their presence, but she does not have to disrupt the mice and wake them up by opening the cage. She reminds me that mice are nocturnal, and they like to sleep when we like to work. I asked Martine if someone taught her this trick, as she has just taught me. She says no, it is just something she picked up by herself over time. Martine recalls that she hadn't realized she was even doing this. She just always put her hand on the part of the cage underneath the space where the mice had nested themselves and felt their body heat through the plastic. I interpreted Martine as saying that it was instinctive to meet the animal through the heat that their bodies produce. Indeed, we do find comfort in warmth. Martine continued to tell me that one day she didn't feel warmth when she put her hand under the nested mice, and she immediately knew something was wrong. Martine commented that it was probably at this moment that she became aware of what she had been doing all along. Martine pauses and reflects for a minute. She then sums up her work for me as the opposite of a physician's work. Martine continues to explain that she has a sense of what is normal by working with hundreds of cages of mice, day in and day out, week after week, month after month. When things aren't normal, Martine continues, she works to figure out what is wrong. Martine then tells me that this is the opposite of the doctor. The doctor works with hundreds of sick human patients to learn about abnormalities. Physicians start with abnormality. I start with normality, Martine says. I will now briefly unpick what I see as the significance of this story for how we think about care. I think this story helps show how relational modes of knowing are infrastructural to a science that gains its epistemic authority by being universal. Carol Gilligan explored how universal versus relational modes of knowing both instantiated and reproduced gender hierarchies in the 1980s. She wanted to place value on relational knowledge practices that she called an ethic of care, knowledge practices that women in her study were more likely to engage in. Today, relational modes of knowing continue to be fought for by scholarship as wide-ranging as feminist technoscience, Bourdieusian multiple correspondence analysis, and much of indigenous scholarship. I suggest that the care practices of animal technicians are another kind of relational knowledge practice, one that is deeply embodied. And I would like to also fight for this way of knowing. Gilligan's work on the ethic of care is also helpful because it has been used to study the relationship between gender and knowledge in veterinary medicine specifically. Veterinary medicine has been marked by a rapid shift in the number of female practitioners since the 1980s, shifting what had once been considered a very masculine profession into a female-dominated profession. The increasing number of women in veterinary medicine has raised questions about the extent to which changing the gender profile of the profession will change its knowledge practices. Two perspectives have emerged in this context, and both are rooted in empirical research. One finds that women veterinarians are transforming the profession with a more caring ethos, and the other finds that the profession remains masculine even though women are becoming more prominent in it. In other words, the feminization of veterinary medicine has not necessarily meant that more relational ways of knowing have come to the fore. This aligns with a key argument that feminist technoscience scholarship has made, particularly our colleague Judy Weissman, who has forcefully argued that bringing more women into science will not necessarily change its ethos in the ways liberal feminism suggests. This framing of care matters for the crisis of care literature. I would suggest Martine's knowledge is not repressed because she is a woman, nor did it seem to me during my research that animal technicians experienced alienation because they feared they might lose their job. None of the technicians I met articulated anything like job insecurity. Yet, yes, they earned less money than scientists, but not less than, say, PhD students, or even necessarily some postdocs. Rather, it was the employer at the animal facility who articulated to me his concern about maintaining his animal technician staff. Turnover was a problem for him, and the Institute worked hard to be a good place to work as a solution to that problem. Rather, when I saw something like alienation occur, it seemed to me that it was when the relational knowledge produced in the animal facility was not recognized or was not considered significant. Alienation occurred when the relational knowledge of technicians was not recognized as knowledge at all, but rather as solely a service to a universal life scientist. The scientific ethos sees the material world as an object, and it seeks to cancel out the relations that produce those objects. The life scientists had a goal: to create universal knowledge that could result in standardized care in the form of a pharmaceutical. I am not critiquing this goal. Indeed, I have certainly benefited from it, having recently received my flu jab. But scientists are therefore not necessarily focused on embodying forth the world through caring relations. Their version of science can understand the laboratory as an object of care in a way that animal technicians cannot. The problem is that in the process, the life sciences as an institution can struggle to see, and thus risks canceling out, the relationally produced mind of the animal facility that is produced across bodies and species. Oppression in science, I would like to suggest, therefore occurred by repressing the laboratory animal as a relation, one that animal technicians and mice produce alongside one another. Care as knowledge requires habituation to the indistinguishable, so that shock or surprise can make that embodied knowledge realizable, as seen in the case of Martine's search for heat produced through mouse bodies that can be felt at the bottom of a cage. And habituation to the indistinguishable is required for people like Martine to eventually put into words or symbols the indices of their interactions that they accumulate over time in doing their knowledge as care. I learned from animal technicians the empirical truth behind the anthropologist Eduardo Cohn's argument that not noticing a difference is a crucial component of knowledge generally and of knowing beyond the human specifically. Becoming habituated to a normal so that its disruption can be registered as significant is a crucial, if underappreciated, way of knowing. And it is how care works as knowledge often. The crisis of care discourse recognizes that emplaced people working day in and day out in caring relations are required. It responds with the need to provide monetary value to this work. I agree in general, but would respond that the crisis of care is also a crisis of knowing. So thank you for listening. If you would like to learn more about this research, I just wanted to provide the discount code so you could get 30% off. But more importantly, I want to say that you can find it for free online at NYU Press's website. The research was supported by a Wellcome Trust New Investigator Award, and the Wellcome Trust generously paid for the book to be made available as open access. So I look forward to your questions. Thank you.